Have you ever found yourself in a situation where a seemingly minor mistake ended up having significant consequences? Well, that's what happened to me, and I had no idea things would turn out this way. Trust plays a crucial role in any relationship, and it takes a lot of hard work to build it, but it can be shattered with just one wrong move. Unfortunately, I made that mistake, and I still regret it to this day. I'm a 36-year-old woman, and I'm married to my husband, who is 40 years old. We've been married for 2 years now. My husband is a professor at our local university, and I work there as an assistant professor. I joined the university 3 years ago because they offered a good salary and shorter working hours compared to my previous job. My husband holds a senior position at the same university, and he's highly respected there. I actually met my husband at the university when I was hired as an assistant professor to work under his supervision. He was even part of my interview process. I developed an immediate crush on him because he was intelligent and fun. I was ecstatic when I got the job working alongside him. Our roles required us to work closely together, attending classes and grading papers together. Spending so much time together naturally led to us getting to know each other better. Our relationship started with casual conversations and jokes, but it soon progressed to having lunch together and spending even more time with each other. The attraction between us was mutual, and it didn't take long before we officially became a couple. After being together for a year, my husband proposed to me, and I accepted. I enjoyed his company, and I was impressed by his respected position at the college. His authoritative demeanor was something I found attractive, and he always took good care of me. So I said yes, and we had a small wedding ceremony to celebrate our union. Our married life was going smoothly. I had moved into his cozy bungalow, and we were happily living together. Our life together was going quite well, especially since we also worked together. I was content and satisfied in my marriage, feeling like I had everything I ever desired. My husband embodied the qualities of a perfect alpha male, strong, confident, and charismatic. He had a clear sense of purpose and knew how to achieve his goals. I deeply admired his intelligence and strong work ethic. I believed we were an ideal match. However, I ended up losing him due to a small mistake I made a year into our marriage, a mistake I never thought would have such severe consequences. I deeply wish I could undo that mistake. It all began when a new assistant professor joined our university, whom we'll refer to as George. George was around my age, and he had an appealing charm, self-assuredness, and I must admit, he was quite attractive. We had casual conversations a few times before, but nothing out of the ordinary. One day, when my husband was out of town and I was working from a cafe near the university, George and I coincidentally ran into each other. We both ordered coffee and started chatting. The conversation was lighthearted and enjoyable. We talked about our classes, the students, and shared some humorous anecdotes about university life. As the conversation progressed, I found myself increasingly drawn to George's charisma. It was refreshing to have a friendly and engaging conversation outside of my usual routine. After our coffee, we decided to take a walk around the nearby park. We laughed, joked, and before I knew it, hours had passed. Feeling a bit guilty, I checked the time and realized it was getting late. George walked me back to my car, and as we said our goodbyes, he leaned in and kissed me. I was taken aback, but didn't pull away immediately. It was just a brief kiss, but it was enough to shake my entire world. I drove home feeling a mix of emotions: guilt, confusion, and a strange exhilaration. I knew I had to tell my husband, but I couldn't bring myself to do it right away. Days turned into weeks, and I kept that kiss a secret, hoping the guilt would fade. But secrets have a way of coming out. One evening, while we were having dinner, my husband noticed I was unusually quiet. He asked me if something was wrong, and I finally broke down and told him about the kiss with George. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he simply said, "I need some time to think." The next few days were agonizing. My husband became distant, and I could see the pain in his eyes every time he looked at me. Finally, he sat me down and told me he couldn't trust me anymore. He said that trust, once broken, is incredibly hard to rebuild, and he wasn't sure if he could ever look at me the same way again. Despite my pleas and apologies, he decided to move out and stay with a friend for a while. We eventually separated, and our once happy marriage ended in a painful divorce. I lost not only my husband, but also the respect of my colleagues at the university. To this day, I regret that one mistake. I wish I could go back and change my actions, but all I can do now is learn from my experience. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it can change everything. Covering various topics from work to our personal lives. George was single and had recently moved to town. He was easy to talk to, and before I knew it, a few hours had passed. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. At that moment, I didn't attach much significance to it. I liked talking to George, but I was happily married to my husband. Little did I realize that this seemingly small mistake of exchanging numbers with George would trigger a series of events that would completely disrupt my life. Over the next few weeks, George and I began texting each other. Initially, our messages were about work and our hobbies, but gradually, they took a flirtatious turn. At first, I couldn't believe it. I was sure that everyone knew I was married and who my husband was. George started sending subtly flirtatious texts, and although I could have chosen to ignore them, I didn't. Instead, I responded in a flirtatious manner myself. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't seem to control myself. I only messaged him when my husband wasn't around because I couldn't risk my husband finding out. I thought I was just having harmless fun with our texts, not doing anything terribly wrong. Then, one day, my husband and I had a major argument. He wanted to have a baby, but I had previously told him that I wasn't ready for parenthood. We had discussed this before, and I had been clear about not wanting a baby at this time. Raising a child comes with significant responsibilities, and I didn't believe I was prepared for that level of commitment. I tried explaining this to my husband, but he was too angry to listen. He said hurtful things, accusing me of running away from responsibilities due to my nature. His words deeply upset me, and he left the house to have some space. I was home alone, feeling upset and vulnerable after our fight. That's when George messaged me, asking if I wanted to meet for a drink. I hesitated at first, but the temptation was strong, so I agreed to see him. Since my husband needed space away from me, I felt it was fair for me to have some space as well. I thought it would be okay to meet with George under the circumstances. As I texted George, I made up my mind to meet him that night. We chose a bar located far from the university, on the outskirts of town, to minimize the chances of running into anyone who might recognize me there. The bar had a fantastic atmosphere, with dim lights and soft music creating the perfect setting for a night out. We indulged in drinks, and our conversation remained light and enjoyable. However, things began to spiral out of control as the night wore on. I ended up getting extremely drunk, ordering multiple shots of vodka. George remained with me throughout the night, and our flirting became more intense. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, and I momentarily forgot about the fight with my husband. It was a relief to escape the marital stress, even if only temporarily. The chemistry between George and me was undeniable, unlike anything I had experienced before. That night, I made a terrible mistake by cheating on my husband. Afterward, George walked me to my cab as we waited on the pavement. While we stood there, he kissed me. He gave me ample time and space to pull away, but I didn't. I kissed him back. I was so intoxicated that I didn't fully grasp the situation until the following morning. The fear of being exposed lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the anxiety that my world could come crashing down at any moment. I avoided any further contact with George, hoping that he would move on and forget about our ill-fated encounter. Life went on, but my guilt never subsided. Every day, I felt the weight of my secret, and it started to affect my relationship with my husband. I became distant, avoiding intimate moments and finding excuses to spend time apart. My husband noticed the change and grew increasingly concerned. He would ask if everything was okay, and I would assure him that I was just stressed from work. But deep down, I knew I was pushing him away. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, my husband brought up the subject of trust. He spoke about how crucial it was in our relationship and how he valued our honesty with each other. His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I realized that I couldn't continue living this lie, but the fear of losing him was still paralyzing. That night, as we lay in bed, I mustered the courage to speak. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling. My husband turned to me, concern etched on his face. "What is it?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath and began to confess. I told him about the argument we had, my meeting with George, the kiss, and how I had been drowning in guilt ever since. As I spoke, tears streamed down my face, and I could see the hurt and betrayal in his eyes. When I finished, there was a long silence. My husband sat up, his face a mix of shock and pain. "I can't believe you kept this from me," he said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you." "I know," I sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake, and I regret it every day. I didn't know how to tell you. I was so scared of losing you." He got out of bed and paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "I need some time to think," he finally said, leaving the room. I sat there, my heart aching, knowing that I might have just destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. The next few days were unbearable. My husband stayed with a friend, and I was left alone with my thoughts and regrets. I realized how much I had taken our relationship for granted and how my actions had caused so much pain. After a week, my husband returned. He sat me down and told me that he needed time to process everything, but that he wasn't ready to give up on us. "I still love you," he said, "but rebuilding trust will take time." From that moment on, I vowed to be completely honest with him. I sought therapy to understand why I had acted the way I did and to work on my issues. We also attended couples counseling to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy, but slowly we began to heal. My husband and I grew closer, and our relationship became stronger because of the trials we had faced. I learned the importance of honesty and the value of the trust we had rebuilt. Now, years later, I look back on that time as a painful but necessary lesson. I learned that mistakes don't have to define us, and that with honesty, love, and perseverance, we can overcome even the most challenging obstacles. I am grateful every day for the second chance my husband gave me, and for the love that has endured despite the mistakes I made. Disbelief and replied, "Just a kiss? Do you think that makes it any less of a betrayal?" His voice was filled with hurt and anger. "You lied to me, you hid this from me, and you continued to let it fester. How can I ever trust you again?" I broke down in tears, trying to convey my remorse and desperation. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I should have told you right away, but I was so scared of losing you. Please, give me a chance to make things right." He shook his head, his expression a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "I don't know if I can. You betrayed my trust, and that's not something you can easily fix with an apology. I need time to think." Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere at home remained tense and filled with unspoken words. My husband and I barely spoke to each other, and the silence was suffocating. I tried to give him the space he needed, but the uncertainty was agonizing. I had no idea if he would ever forgive me or if our marriage was truly over. One evening, as we sat in the living room, my husband finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, but I do believe in second chances. If we're going to try to move past this, we need to go to counseling. We need to rebuild what was broken, and that won't be easy." Relief washed over me, and I nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I love you, and I don't want to lose you." We started attending couples therapy, where we learned to communicate more openly and honestly. It was a long and difficult journey, but gradually we began to heal. I had to prove my commitment and dedication to repairing our relationship every single day. Through counseling, I discovered a lot about myself and the underlying issues that had contributed to my actions. I worked on becoming a better, more trustworthy partner, and my husband worked on letting go of the anger and hurt. It was a slow process, but little by little, we started to find our way back to each other. There were times when it felt like we would never fully recover, but we kept pushing forward. We both knew that saving our marriage would require patience, effort, and a willingness to forgive. And although it was incredibly challenging, we were determined to make it work. Years later, our relationship is stronger than ever. We've rebuilt the trust that was shattered, and have become more connected and resilient as a couple. My mistake taught me the importance of honesty and the devastating impact that a single moment of weakness can have. I will always carry the guilt of what I did, but I am also grateful for the second chance to make things right and for the love that endured despite the odds. Haunted me daily. I had hoped that time apart might heal the wounds between us, but instead it seemed to drive us further apart. The days in my new apartment were long and filled with self-reflection. I often wondered how I had let my life spiral out of control so drastically. One afternoon, while I was packing up my belongings at the university, I ran into George. He approached me, looking concerned. "I heard what happened," he said softly. "I'm really sorry." I could barely muster a response, overwhelmed by the gravity of my situation. A week after losing my job, I received a letter from my husband. It wasn't an olive branch, but rather a formal notice. He had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. My heart sank as I read through the document, tears blurring my vision. Despite everything, I had clung to the hope that we could find a way to reconcile, but it was clear that he had made his decision. In the following months, I tried to rebuild my life from scratch. I found a part-time job to cover my expenses and started attending therapy to work through my emotions and understand the underlying issues that had led to my infidelity. Therapy became a crucial part of my healing process. It helped me understand my flaws, the mistakes I had made, and how to prevent them in the future. Despite my efforts, the pain of losing my husband and the life we had built together never fully went away. I often thought about reaching out to him, but I knew it would only make things worse. He had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with me, and I had to respect his wishes. Years have passed since that fateful day. I've moved to a new city, started a new job, and even made new friends. Life has a way of moving on, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Through the ups and downs, I've learned valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the importance of communication in a relationship. I still think about my husband and what could have been if I hadn't made that mistake. The regret will always be a part of me, a reminder of how easily trust can be shattered and how difficult it is to rebuild. But I've also learned to forgive myself, to accept my past, and to strive to be a better person each day. To anyone reading this, I hope my story serves as a cautionary tale. Cherish the trust you have in your relationships and never take it for granted. One wrong move can change everything, and sometimes there's no going back. Burdened my heart, and now I had to grapple with the repercussions of my husband's vengeful actions. Days turned into weeks, and I struggled to make ends meet. My savings were meager, and despite applying for jobs far and wide, I received no offers. I felt like a failure in every aspect of my life. However, an unexpected turn of events occurred when George reached out to me. He had resorted to emailing me since I had blocked his contact on my phone. Retrieving my mail wasn't a challenge, since George also worked as a professor at the university where I used to be employed. He informed me that he had heard about my situation and expressed a desire to assist me. Initially, I hesitated because, in many ways, he was the root cause of my predicament. I was already without a job, and my husband harbored strong resentment toward me. I couldn't fathom how things could worsen, so I decided to meet George to see what he had in mind. Our rendezvous took place at a cozy cafe near my apartment. George was impeccably dressed in a sharp suit and wore a charming smile. He kindly offered to buy me a coffee, and we settled at a small table by the window. As I poured out my troubles to him, he attentively listened. I divulged the entire saga involving my husband, my job loss, and my life spiraling out of control. Speaking with him brought a sense of relief, as if a heavy burden was finally lifting from my chest. It marked the first time I had shared my ordeal with someone. After I had finished recounting my troubles, George remained silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward and gently took my hand. In a soft tone, he apologized, expressing his unawareness of the extent of my suffering. His gaze locked onto mine, and for an instant, I felt myself immersed in his eyes. They held a warmth and kindness I hadn't encountered in a long time, almost providing solace. "I want to help you," he offered, his gesture comforting. Despite appreciating his offer, I initially declined, fearing it would only further enrage my husband. I didn't want to exacerbate the situation. However, as my circumstances grew increasingly dire with each passing day, I found myself contemplating George's proposition more seriously. With no other viable options, and believing in George's genuine intent to assist, I reached out to him. He had connections within the academic realm and promised to aid me in securing a new job. My attempts to communicate with my husband had been futile. He had been avoiding my calls and refused to acknowledge my existence. I had called him repeatedly to discuss my job termination, but his silence was deafening. Thus, I informed George of my change of heart, and he proceeded to help me secure a new position at a different university. I had a glimmer of hope that my life was finally getting back on track. Securing a job marked the first step toward making everything right. George also assisted me with my CV and cover letter, providing valuable advice that greatly improved my application. After a few weeks of diligent efforts and several interviews, I received a job offer from a university in another state. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a fresh start and a chance to rebuild my life. I accepted the offer and prepared to move, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. I informed George of the good news, and he congratulated me warmly, offering his continued support. Despite the relief of securing a job, I couldn't shake the lingering feelings of guilt and regret. My marriage was still in shambles, and my husband remained distant and unforgiving. I knew that rebuilding trust would be a long and arduous process, but I was determined to make amends and prove my sincerity. As I settled into my new job and environment, I made a conscious effort to focus on my work and personal growth. I attended therapy sessions to address my emotional turmoil and gain insight into my past mistakes. Slowly but surely, I began to heal and regain a sense of stability. My new colleagues were welcoming and supportive, and I found solace in the routine of academic life. Months passed, and I continued to reach out to my husband, hoping for a chance to talk and reconcile. My persistence eventually paid off when he agreed to meet for coffee. Our conversation was tense and filled with unresolved emotions, but it was a step toward rebuilding our connection. I apologized sincerely for my actions and expressed my commitment to making things right. While my husband was still hurt and angry, he acknowledged my efforts and agreed to give our relationship another chance. Rebuilding trust was a slow and challenging process, but we took it one day at a time. We attended couples therapy and worked on open communication and mutual understanding. It wasn't easy, but we were both committed to healing and moving forward. Over time, we began to rediscover the love and connection that had initially brought us together. As for George, he remained a supportive friend, respecting the boundaries of our relationship. I was grateful for his assistance during my darkest times, but I knew that my focus needed to be on repairing my marriage and building a better future with my husband. Reflecting on my journey, I realized the importance of trust, honesty, and communication in a relationship. My small mistake had led to significant consequences, but it also provided valuable lessons and an opportunity for growth. I learned to cherish the trust we had rebuilt and to never take it for granted. To anyone reading this, I hope my story serves as a reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of nurturing and protecting it. Mistakes can happen, but with sincere effort and dedication, it's possible to heal and rebuild what was broken. Father's job transfer, and I felt too ashamed to confide in them about my mistakes. They had always been proud of me, and I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing them with the truth. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself sinking deeper into despair. The reality of my situation was overwhelming, and I struggled to see a way out. I decided to sign the divorce papers, realizing that clinging to a marriage where my husband no longer trusted or wanted me would only prolong the pain for both of us. After signing the papers, I mailed them back to my husband's attorney. The finality of it all was like a heavy weight on my chest. I had lost my husband, my job, and my sense of self-worth. In my darkest moments, I contemplated leaving town to start anew somewhere else, but the thought of running away felt cowardly. I knew I had to face the consequences of my actions and rebuild my life from the ground up. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the phone rang. It was George. Despite everything, he had remained a constant presence, offering support and understanding. He told me about a job opening at a community college in a neighboring town. It wasn't the prestigious university position I once held, but it was a chance to start over. He encouraged me to apply and assured me that he would put in a good word for me with the hiring committee. With nothing left to lose, I applied for the position. To my surprise, I was invited for an interview. During the interview, I was honest about my previous employment and the circumstances that led to my departure. I explained how I had learned from my mistakes and was eager for an opportunity to prove myself. The interviewers seemed understanding, and I left feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. A week later, I received a call offering me the job. I accepted with gratitude, realizing that this was my chance to rebuild my life. I moved to the new town and began teaching at the community college. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I slowly started to regain my confidence. I continued to attend therapy sessions, working through my guilt and shame. I also made a conscious effort to reconnect with my family, explaining my situation and seeking their support. To my relief, they were understanding and offered their unconditional love and encouragement. As for my husband, I respected his decision to move on and tried to find closure. I wrote him a heartfelt letter apologizing for my actions and expressing my hope that he could find happiness again. I never received a response, but writing the letter helped me find some peace. Years passed, and I gradually rebuilt my life. I focused on my career, made new friends, and even started dating again. While the pain of my past mistakes never completely faded, I learned to forgive myself and move forward. I realized that everyone makes mistakes, but it's how we learn and grow from them that truly defines us. To anyone reading this, I hope my story serves as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always a chance for redemption and a fresh start. Mistakes can be painful, but they also offer valuable lessons that can lead to personal growth and a brighter future. And his relief was evident as he walked away without looking back. I felt a profound sense of loss, but I knew it was time to accept reality and move forward. I moved into a modest apartment and focused on rebuilding my life from scratch. The transition was challenging, filled with moments of doubt and loneliness. My savings were dwindling, and finding a new job proved to be an uphill battle. George, who had been a source of support, reached out to me again. Despite my initial reservations, I decided to meet with him, hoping for any assistance he could offer. George apologized for the turmoil his presence had caused in my life and offered to help me find a new job. He had connections in the academic world and promised to leverage them to assist me. While hesitant at first, I eventually accepted his help, realizing I had no other viable options. George's influence helped me secure a teaching position at a community college in a nearby town. It wasn't as prestigious as my previous job, but it was a start. Settling into my new role was a daunting task. I was haunted by the memories of my failed marriage and the mistakes that had led to my downfall. However, the work was fulfilling, and I gradually began to find solace in my new environment. My colleagues were kind, and I made a few friends who helped me navigate this new chapter of my life. As I rebuilt my career, I continued to work on myself. I attended therapy sessions to address the guilt and shame that plagued me. The process was slow, but I began to understand and forgive myself for the mistakes I had made. I also reconnected with my family, who had been a source of unconditional support. Sharing my struggles with them brought a sense of relief and helped mend our relationship. Despite the progress I was making, thoughts of my husband lingered. I missed him deeply and longed for his forgiveness. I wrote him a heartfelt letter, expressing my remorse and hope for his happiness. Though I never received a response, writing the letter brought me a sense of closure. Years passed, and I continued to rebuild my life. I focused on my career, developed new friendships, and even began to date again. The pain of my past mistakes never fully disappeared, but I learned to live with it and grow from it. I realized that while my actions had caused significant damage, they also offered valuable lessons that helped shape me into a better person. To anyone reading this, I hope my story serves as a reminder that mistakes are a part of life. They can be painful and have severe consequences, but they also provide opportunities for growth and redemption. It's never too late to take responsibility for your actions. learn from them, and strive to become a better version of yourself. Great deal. Unfortunately, that never happened. It seemed he was intent on moving on, while I was still grappling with my mistakes. I continued to focus on work, immersing myself in my new job to fill the void left by my broken marriage. My colleagues were supportive, and some had become good friends, which made the transition a bit easier. However, there wasn't a single day that passed without thoughts of my ex-husband haunting me. I couldn't help but wonder what might have been if I hadn't made that foolish mistake. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from my ex-husband. My hands trembled as I opened it, not knowing what to expect. In the letter, he acknowledged receiving my previous messages and letters. He admitted that he had been deeply hurt by my actions, but also confessed that he had found it in himself to forgive me. However, he made it clear that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. He had moved on with his life and wished me well in mine. His words brought a bittersweet sense of closure. I was relieved to know he had forgiven me, yet saddened by the finality of his decision to keep our lives separate. Despite the pain, I decided to honor his wishes. I stopped trying to contact him and focused entirely on my own healing. Therapy became a vital part of my life, helping me to navigate through my feelings of guilt and regret. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of a future where I could find happiness again, even if it meant being on my own. Over time, I found new hobbies and passions. I started painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. I also joined a book club, which allowed me to connect with others and find joy in shared interests. These activities, along with the support of my friends and therapist, helped me rebuild my self-esteem and regain a sense of purpose. A year after my ex-husband's letter, I met someone new. His name was Mark, and he was kind, understanding, and patient. I was honest with him about my past from the beginning, and he appreciated my openness. We took things slow, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. Although the scars of my past will always remain, I've learned that it's possible to heal and move forward. My experience has taught me the importance of trust, communication, and forgiveness, not just from others, but also from oneself. While I can't change what happened, I've come to accept it as a part of my journey, one that has ultimately made me stronger and more resilient. To anyone reading this who may be struggling with their own mistakes, I want to say this: it's never too late to seek help and start anew. The path to healing is long and often difficult, but it's worth it. Keep moving forward, and eventually, you'll find your way. I had hoped that time would heal my wounds, but seeing my ex-husband's new life with a family of his own was a harsh reminder of everything I had lost. It was like a dagger to my heart, and the pain was almost unbearable. The young woman who answered the door was everything I wasn't: radiant, happy, and carrying the child that I had once imagined could have been ours. The encounter brought back a flood of emotions. The argument about having a child that led to the night with George seemed so trivial in hindsight. If I had been more understanding, more patient, maybe things would have been different. But dwelling on what-ifs only deepened my sorrow. I left his house feeling more defeated than ever. The woman had been polite, but it was clear I was no longer welcome in a life I once shared. The tears I tried to hold back on their doorstep flowed freely as I walked away. My steps felt heavy, and every moment replayed in my mind, tormenting me with visions of a life that was no longer mine. Back in my apartment, the breakdowns returned with a vengeance. The dreams were the worst. In them, I saw my ex-husband with his new family, happy and complete, while I stood on the sidelines, an outsider looking in. Waking up from those dreams left me feeling hollow and more alone than ever. I scheduled another therapy session, desperate for some form of solace. Talking about my feelings helped, but it couldn't erase the pain. The therapist suggested I focus on my future and let go of the past, but that was easier said than done. The guilt and regret were like anchors, pulling me back whenever I tried to move forward. One day, in a particularly vulnerable moment, I wrote a letter to my ex-husband. I poured my heart out, apologizing once again and expressing my deepest regrets. I told him about the pain I felt seeing his new life and how I wished things had been different. I didn't expect a response, but writing the letter was a way to unburden my heart. Weeks went by without a reply. I accepted that this was another step in the healing process I had to navigate alone. My focus shifted back to my job and therapy. I started to immerse myself in work, taking on new projects to keep my mind occupied. Slowly, I began to see small glimpses of progress. The breakdowns became less frequent, and I started to find moments of peace. The journey of healing is long and winding, filled with ups and downs. Seeing my ex-husband's new life was a setback, but it also served as a reminder of what I needed to strive for: peace and acceptance. I know now that the guilt and regret will always be a part of me, but they don't have to define me. Every day, I take small steps toward building a new life. It's not easy, and there are times when the weight of my past feels overwhelming. But I remind myself that each day is an opportunity to move forward, even if it's just a little. I hold on to the hope that one day I'll find the happiness and contentment that I once had, even if it looks different from what I had imagined. For anyone reading this, know that healing is a process, and it's okay to take your time. Mistakes don't define you. How you choose to move forward does. Keep going, and you'll find your way through the darkness.